When you settle into the quiet of night, with the world around you fading into stillness, there is a comfort in knowing that the ordinary patterns of life continue as expected. The hum of distant cars, the sigh of wind outside your window, the faint ticking of a clock, each sound reassures you that you are safe, cocooned in routine. Yet, just beyond this calm familiarity, there are stories whispered across decades, tales of encounters with figures who seem to slip through the cracks of the ordinary world. These figures are not ghosts, nor are they easily explained as agents of any known government. They are known by a name that feels both simple and ominous: the silent men in black. To hear the words "men in black" might bring a smile, because for many people the phrase recalls light-hearted films filled with clever banter and alien adventures. But long before Hollywood transformed them into something playful, these shadowy figures were described in ways that are far more unsettling. The stories suggest visitors who arrive unannounced, often after someone has reported seeing something strange in the sky. They come dressed in plain dark suits, their mannerisms awkward, their speech halting or oddly formal. At times, they seem human but not quite right, like an actor reading a role he doesn't fully understand. At other times, their presence feels heavier, as if they carry with them a silence that presses against the air itself. The mystery of the men in black does not begin with bright lights in the sky, but rather in the quiet aftermath of such sightings. When a person dares to speak of a UFO hovering above a field, or of lights darting across the horizon, it is often not the flying object that lingers most in memory, but the strange visit that follows. A knock at the door, a stranger waiting on the doorstep, a conversation that leaves the witness unsettled, perhaps even frightened, though they cannot quite explain why. These encounters seem to happen in liminal spaces, late at night, on empty streets, in diners half-lit by flickering neon. They feel like intrusions into private lives, delivered not with violence, but with a peculiar form of pressure, a warning to remain silent. What gives these stories such staying power is the consistency of the details. Over and over from different decades and different corners of the world, people describe visitors who look and act in similar ways. They are often tall and thin, with faces pale as if drained of color. Their suits are slightly outdated, as though they stepped out of another time. Their cars, too, are reported as black, glossy, and oddly anachronistic, sometimes vanishing without sound. Witnesses describe their voices as robotic, flat, or oddly sing-song, as though the speaker were imitating human speech without fully mastering its rhythm. These details repeat so often that they build a pattern difficult to ignore. At the same time, the men in black are elusive. There are no official documents naming them, no straightforward government files that explain their existence. They live in the space between rumor and fact, testimony and disbelief. Skeptics argue they are exaggerations, hallucinations, or the products of cultural imagination. Believers counter that the consistency of accounts suggests something more, something that blends secrecy with strangeness, and hovering in the middle are countless listeners who do not claim to know the truth, but who feel the eerie pull of the question: who are these silent agents, and what role do they play in the tapestry of unexplained phenomena? As you let your body relax, breathing deeply and steadily, imagine how it would feel to be one of those witnesses. You might see something extraordinary in the night sky, an object hovering silently, pulsing with light, then vanishing in an instant. Your heart might race, but soon the experience would soften into memory, perhaps even into doubt. Did you truly see it? Could your mind have played a trick? Then, days later, there is a knock at your door. A stranger stands there. He knows what you saw. He advises you not to speak of it. His tone is calm, but there is something deeply unsettling about his presence. When he leaves, you are left with a silence heavier than before, a silence that feels imposed. This is the texture of the men in black mystery, not violence or spectacle, but intrusion and silence. Their appearances seem designed to unsettle, to create doubt, to discourage curiosity. And yet paradoxically, Each encounter only deepens the mystery, spreading it further into public consciousness. If they are meant to erase stories, they have instead amplified them, creating one of the most enduring legends of modern paranormal history. As we begin this journey, drifting gently into the labyrinth of whispers and shadows, we will trace the origins of these figures from their earliest mentions in folklore, through the testimonies of bewildered eyewitnesses, into the sealed corridors of government files, and beyond into the realms of psychology and myth. The men in black occupy many layers at once. They are symbols of secrecy, possible agents of hidden powers, and perhaps even something stranger, something not fully human. For now, as you rest in the calm of your own quiet space, let your thoughts wander at the edges of certainty. Imagine the night sky stretching endlessly above you, stars flickering like watchful eyes. Somewhere, perhaps in the quiet streets of a small town, a car idles silently. Its windows are dark, its engine humming low, and in the stillness, a figure steps out, dressed in black, moving toward a door, preparing to knock. The sound of that knock is faint, almost like a heartbeat in the distance. It is the sound that begins so many stories, the sound that brings us into the mystery of the silent men in black. When we search for the origins of the silent men in black, we are not only searching through UFO history, but through the deeper layers of folklore and human imagination. Every culture has stories of shadowy strangers who appear at the threshold of the known world, delivering warnings, demanding silence, or simply watching without explanation. Long before flying saucers were reported in the skies, people whispered about visitors who arrived without clear purpose, mysterious men on lonely roads, cloaked figures who spoke in riddles, officials who seemed to belong to no government, yet claimed authority over ordinary lives. In these echoes, we can begin to see the roots of the MIB legend. In European folklore, tales often described the arrival of dark men, or watchers, who would appear after extraordinary events. In some Celtic traditions, mysterious travelers would warn villagers not to speak of strange lights or encounters in the night. In Scandinavian sagas, there were mentions of pale strangers in dark clothing who seemed out of place, delivering cryptic words before disappearing into forests. These accounts were not labeled as men in black, but they carried a similar pattern, an intrusion from a stranger whose purpose was to silence or intimidate. When UFO sightings surged centuries later, these older stories provided a cultural backdrop that made the MIB figure strangely familiar. The modern story of the men in black, however, begins in the 20th century, in the shadow of a new and unsettling era. After World War II, the world entered the Cold War, a time of secrecy, espionage, and constant surveillance. Governments developed hidden programs, intelligence agencies expanded their reach, and paranoia seeped into everyday life. At the same time, something new filled the skies. Reports of flying saucers and strange lights became frequent in the late 1940s. The Roswell incident of 1947 brought the UFO mystery into the public consciousness, sparking questions that the government seemed unwilling or unable to answer. It was during this atmosphere of secrecy and unease that the first recognizable Men in Black stories emerged. The earliest widely discussed case came from the early 1950s, involving Albert K. Bender, a man fascinated by UFOs who founded the International Flying Saucer Bureau in Connecticut. Bender claimed that after publishing articles and expressing his enthusiasm, he was visited by three men dressed in dark suits. They did not identify themselves as government officials, yet they warned him in no uncertain terms to stop his research. Bender was shaken. Soon afterward, he abruptly shut down his organization, telling friends and colleagues that he had learned the truth but could not reveal it. To them, he hinted that his silence had been enforced by beings far stranger than any earthly officials. Bender's story was later amplified by writer Gray Barker in his 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, which introduced the phrase, Men in Black, to a wider audience. Barker described them as sinister, almost spectral figures who appeared whenever someone came too close to uncovering the truth about UFOs. While some dismissed Barker's book as sensationalism, others took it seriously, and soon reports of similar encounters began to surface across the country. The idea of the Men in Black was no longer just a personal story, it was becoming part of a collective mystery. The timing of these tales was important. In the 1950s, Americans were already on edge. The Cold War brought constant fear of spies, infiltration, and secret surveillance. The image of strangers in black suits, knocking on doors, fit perfectly with those anxieties. At the same time, the suits themselves symbolized authority, men dressed as if they belonged to government agencies, yet somehow out of step with normal officials. This blending of the ordinary with the uncanny gave the MIB an enduring power. They looked familiar enough to unsettle, yet strange enough to resist easy explanation. Some researchers argue that the early MIB encounters were likely rooted in real government surveillance. In the early years of the UFO phenomenon, intelligence agencies did investigate witnesses, especially those who lived near military bases or radar stations. FBI records confirm that agents interviewed people about flying saucer reports, sometimes asking them not to share details with the press. But those agents left behind paperwork, clear records of their activities. The silent Men in Black, by contrast, left only confusion. They appeared unannounced, spoke cryptically, and often demonstrated abilities that ordinary men could not possess, such as disappearing instantly or showing knowledge they could not reasonably have obtained. The blending of espionage, paranoia, and paranormal strangeness created fertile ground for the legend to grow. By the late 1950s and early 1960s, more stories appeared, often sharing eerily similar details: men who seemed foreign or oddly artificial, cars that gleamed unnaturally, voices that sounded mechanical, and a shared mission of silencing witnesses. Whether real or imagined, these accounts carried the emotional weight of intrusion. For witnesses, the visit was unforgettable, not only because of what was said, but because of the presence itself, a feeling that they had brushed against something beyond ordinary human experience. As the UFO movement gained momentum in the 1960s, authors and investigators began to notice how consistently these figures appeared after sightings. John Keel, famous for his book, The Mothman Prophecies, collected numerous reports from ordinary people in small American towns. He observed how often they described being visited by strangers in black, who seemed to know intimate details of their lives. Keel noted their awkwardness, their strange fascination with everyday objects, their inability to blend in despite their efforts. To him, they were not simply government agents. They seemed like beings playing the role of men, but failing to fully inhabit it. The early origins of the Men in Black then exist in a twilight space between folklore, Cold War reality, and the unknown. They draw from ancient archetypes of shadowy visitors, from the atmosphere of secrecy in the mid-20th century, and from the unsettling experiences of UFO witnesses who felt intimidated into silence. Their roots are tangled, spanning centuries of story and decades of paranoia. Yet from this tangle, a consistent image emerges: the silent visitor at the door, dressed in black, carrying a warning that is both simple and deeply unnerving. As you drift further into this story, imagine those early years. Picture small American towns of the 1950s, quiet streets lined with glowing lampposts, newspapers filled with stories of flying saucers, and neighbors whispering about lights in the sky. Against this backdrop, imagine a car rolling silently through the night. It stops outside a modest home, its headlights briefly cutting across the window. A knock at the door follows, soft but commanding. The person who answers finds a pale stranger in a dark suit, standing too still, speaking too carefully. This is the beginning of the Men in Black legend, the shadow rooted in history, the silence pressing against words yet to be spoken. The heart of the Men in Black mystery lies not in theories or speculation, but in the voices of those who claim to have met them. These testimonies are the threads that weave the legend together. Each account is slightly different in detail, yet eerily similar in tone, as though a single shadow is cast across many different lives. Listening to them is like listening to a quiet chorus of whispers, each voice carrying its own fear, its own confusion, and its own unanswered questions. One of the earliest and most influential encounters belongs to Albert K. Bender, the same man whose silence marked the rise of the Men in Black story. In 1953, after launching his International Flying Saucer Bureau, Bender reported that 3 mysterious men appeared in his room. They did not simply knock at his door. In his account, they materialized in a strange, almost dreamlike way. Dressed in dark suits, they communicated not with long speeches, but with a direct and chilling message. He was to stop his UFO research immediately. Bender said he felt drained of energy, as though their presence sapped his strength. Terrified, he disbanded his organization and refused to reveal what he had learned. For many UFO enthusiasts, Bender's silence spoke louder than words. Years later, in the mid-1960s, a very different but equally strange encounter was reported in the small town of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. This was the era of the Mothman sightings, when strange winged creatures were said to haunt the skies, and the Silver Bridge disaster loomed in the background. Amid the unease, several witnesses described visits from Men in Black. One of them, a journalist named Mary Heyer, who had written extensively about the sightings, recalled that a man in a black suit and thick glasses came to her office. He asked peculiar questions, not only about UFOs, but about mundane topics like the colors of cars driving past. His behavior was so unusual that Heyer felt deeply unsettled. Others in Point Pleasant spoke of similar visitors, pale, expressionless men who drove black cars and seemed to know more than they should about the witnesses' private lives. Another story came from Dr. Herbert Hopkins, a physician from Maine. In 1976, Hopkins claimed he was studying a UFO case when he received a phone call from a man who identified himself as a UFO researcher. Within minutes, the man arrived at Hopkins' home, dressed in a black suit and hat. Hopkins later described him as unnaturally thin, with pale skin and mechanical speech. During the conversation, the visitor seemed to demonstrate strange abilities. He caused coins to vanish before Hopkins' eyes, and at one point instructed Hopkins to destroy his UFO research immediately. Hopkins felt an overwhelming sense of dread. After the visitor left, Hopkins was so shaken that he obeyed the command, burning his files and stepping away from UFO work entirely. These testimonies often share a strange detail. The Men in Black appear to know things they should not. Witnesses describe them mentioning private conversations, personal details, or knowledge of events that had not yet been made public. This creates an atmosphere of unease far greater than any simple intimidation. It is one thing to be warned by a stranger. It is another to feel as though the stranger has stepped into the very privacy of your mind. For many witnesses, the encounters leave behind not only fear, but a lingering sense of violation, as though their thoughts are no longer entirely their own. The behavior of the Men in Black is also consistently described as unnatural. Some witnesses say they seem unfamiliar with basic customs, like eating or shaking hands. One account described a man in black attempting to drink from a glass, but struggling as though he did not understand the motion. Others describe their speech as awkward, with pauses that suggest they are imitating human conversation rather than living it. Their clothing, too, is often described as just slightly wrong: suits that are too old-fashioned, hats that do not fit the era, or fabrics that look artificial, as if assembled from memory rather than purchased in a store. It is in these small details that the eeriness of the Men in Black lingers. They are not threatening in the way a criminal might be. They rarely raise their voices or act violently. Instead, they create discomfort by being just human enough to seem ordinary, and just strange enough to make ordinary life feel suddenly fragile. Witnesses often report feeling as though they are in a dream or a trance. During these encounters, their minds struggling to process what is happening while their bodies go rigid with unease. Skeptics, of course, argue that these testimonies are shaped by fear, misremembering, or even hallucination. They suggest that people who witness extraordinary events, such as UFO sightings, may already be in a heightened emotional state. The arrival of a stranger, even a perfectly normal one, could then take on exaggerated meaning. But the persistence of these accounts, stretching across decades and continents, raises a difficult question. If these are simply mistaken impressions of ordinary events, why do the details remain so consistent? Why do so many people, unknown to each other, describe the same pale skin, the same flat voices, the same silent black cars? Perhaps one of the most chilling aspects of the testimonies is not what the men in black say, but what they leave behind. Many witnesses describe feelings of exhaustion or depression after the visit. Some lose interest in pursuing their UFO research. Others feel watched for weeks afterward, as though the encounter was only the beginning of a longer surveillance. The silence they impose is not always direct, it is psychological, a weight pressing down on curiosity until it fades. Yet paradoxically, each silenced witness adds another story to the legend, keeping it alive in whispers and second-hand accounts. To truly appreciate these testimonies, it helps to imagine them not as dramatic confrontations, but as quiet, unsettling intrusions into ordinary life. Picture yourself in a small town, sitting at your kitchen table after dinner. The house is calm, the day's work complete. Then a knock at the door. A man stands outside, tall and pale, dressed in a black suit that seems just slightly out of fashion. His smile is thin, his voice flat. He asks you about something you saw in the sky days earlier, though you told no one. He advises you to remain silent. His words are calm, but they leave you trembling. When he leaves, the night feels darker than before, the silence heavier. This is how the men in black leave their mark, not with violence, but with the quiet unraveling of certainty. These eyewitness testimonies are the lifeblood of the MIB mystery. They bridge the gap between folklore and speculation, between government secrecy and paranormal possibility. Each account is a fragment of a larger puzzle, impossible to fit neatly into place, but too consistent to ignore. And as we move deeper into this story, the question becomes sharper. Are these encounters the work of real agents operating in secret, or do they reveal something stranger, something beyond the limits of human explanation? When we look at the testimonies of the men in black, one question rises naturally. If these figures are not merely folklore or hallucination, then where do they come from? For many, the most plausible answer is that they are connected in some way to governments, intelligence agencies, or secret programs hidden from the public eye. After all, the mid-20th century was a time when secrecy was a weapon as powerful as any bomb, and when ordinary citizens often found themselves caught in the shadows of geopolitical struggle. To understand the Men in Black mystery fully, we must enter the archives of official silence, where files are redacted, denials are rehearsed, and secrecy itself becomes a language. During the Cold War, governments around the world were locked in a competition of knowledge: who could build the most powerful weapons, who could master the skies, who could keep secrets the longest. In this climate, any unusual sighting in the air was not simply a curiosity, but a potential threat. A strange light over the desert might be a Soviet aircraft, or it might reveal American technology not yet ready for public view. This made civilian UFO reports far more than idle gossip. They became pieces of intelligence, fragments of data that governments wanted to control. The US government did in fact take UFO sightings seriously, though rarely in the way the public imagined. The US Air Force's Project Blue Book, active from 1952 to 1969, investigated thousands of reports. While most were dismissed as natural phenomena or misidentified aircraft, a small percentage were left unexplained. Behind these investigations, secrecy was the rule. Witnesses were often told to remain quiet, not because of aliens, but because officials did not want details of experimental aircraft or radar capabilities leaking into public discussion. Declassified documents from the FBI and CIA confirm that surveillance of UFO witnesses did take place. In some cases, intelligence agents visited people who reported strange objects, particularly those who lived near sensitive military installations. These visits were not necessarily sinister. They were attempts to filter real intelligence threats from harmless misidentifications. But here lies the seed of confusion. An official agent in a dark suit might seem, to a frightened witness, like one of the mysterious men in black. When rumors spread, and when details grew distorted in retelling, the line between real government surveillance and the uncanny stories of robotic visitors blurred. Yet, there are important differences. Genuine government agents left behind paperwork, interview notes, security logs, signed reports. The silent men in black, by contrast, seemed to vanish without trace. Witnesses reported them arriving in gleaming black cars that left no registration records, or speaking in ways that no trained intelligence officer ever would. Official surveillance is careful and procedural. The MIB encounters, by contrast, felt dreamlike, distorted, and sometimes physically impossible. This tension has fueled decades of debate. Were some witnesses truly visited by agents of the state, while others experienced something stranger? Or were both realities blending together in a way no one could fully untangle? Some researchers argue that the men in black might represent disinformation tactics at work. In the 1950s and 1960s, agencies like the CIA actively used psychological manipulation to shape public perception. Programs such as COINTELPRO and MK Ultra demonstrated that the government was willing to infiltrate groups, spread false information, and even manipulate individuals' beliefs in pursuit of control. If the UFO phenomenon attracted too much attention, it is possible that intelligence agencies sent agents disguised or otherwise to intimidate witnesses, muddy the waters, or make the entire subject seem too bizarre to take seriously. In this sense, the men in black could have been an invention not of aliens, but of human strategy, the deliberate blending of fear and absurdity to discourage curiosity. But there are elements of the testimonies that remain difficult to reconcile with ordinary disinformation campaigns. Take, for example, reports of MIB vehicles vanishing into thin air, or visitors demonstrating knowledge that no earthly intelligence could possess. Consider the story of Dr. Herbert Hopkins, whose strange guest made a coin disappear before his eyes, or the countless reports of pale men who seemed unable to understand simple human behaviors. If these were merely agents of the state, they were astonishingly poor actors, and yet, their appearances were effective. Witnesses often abandoned their research, withdrew from public conversation, or quietly faded from the UFO community. The intimidation worked, whether its source was human or something else. The government, for its part, has consistently denied any connection to the men in black. Official statements claim no knowledge of such figures, and no records have ever surfaced that directly confirm their existence. But the absence of evidence does not erase the weight of testimony. Instead, it leaves a vacuum in which speculation thrives. In this vacuum, researchers see three possibilities. The first, the men in black are entirely fictional, born from misidentification and fear. The second, they are real agents, using intimidation tactics disguised as something stranger. The third, they are something beyond both government and folklore, intrusions from a realm not yet understood. For listeners drifting into calm reflection, this ambiguity is at the heart of the mystery. Governments are masters of denial. Files can be destroyed, records altered, and truths hidden for generations. To many, it is no surprise that no official evidence of the MIB exists. If such figures serve to silence witnesses, their success depends on remaining invisible in the archives. At the same time, the uncanny details of their behavior suggest that if they are connected to governments, they are unlike any agents we know. As you let these ideas settle in your mind, imagine the atmosphere of those Cold War years. Picture the tense silence of a government office, files stacked in neat rows, red stamps, declaring classified. Picture civilians filling out UFO reports, unsure whether to laugh at themselves or to look over their shoulders. Picture the knock at the door late at night, a stranger in a black suit stepping into the light of a porch lamp. Is he a government agent, sent to discourage curiosity? Or is he something that governments themselves could not explain, a shadow passing through human events with motives we can only guess at? The silence of the state is a silence filled with possibilities, and within that silence, the men in black continue to linger, half agents, half phantoms, always just beyond certainty. As the mystery of the men in black unfolded through the decades, many researchers and experiencers began to notice something that official explanations could not fully cover. The behaviors, appearances, and even the physical presence of these visitors often went far beyond what could be attributed to secret government agents or psychological trickery. Some encounters seemed almost supernatural, as if these beings did not quite belong to the same reality as the witnesses themselves. To many, this suggested that the men in black were not simply humans in disguise, but emissaries from a stranger, more elusive realm. Eyewitnesses frequently described the MIB as having an unnatural quality, almost as though they were imitations of human beings rather than real people. Their skin is often pale, waxy, or oddly smooth, lacking the small imperfections we expect in human faces. Their movements can appear stiff, jerky, or robotic, as though they are unfamiliar with the natural rhythm of walking, sitting, or gesturing. In some cases, their speech patterns are reported to be mechanical, halting, or strangely formal, as though they are reciting from a script. Such accounts leave many wondering, if these are government agents, why do they so often seem inhuman? Some theorists suggest that the men in black may be a form of extraterrestrial presence, not in the sense of beings arriving in spaceships, but in a subtler, more insidious way. In this interpretation, the MIB are not aliens, as pop culture imagines them, but rather intermediaries, beings who monitor human contact with UFO phenomena and intervene when the veil of secrecy is at risk of being lifted. They may not represent governments at all, but rather an authority higher than any nation. Witnesses often report that these figures seem to know private details about their lives, or to appear almost immediately after a UFO sighting. This suggests a surveillance capacity far beyond what human agencies could reasonably achieve, particularly in the mid-20th century, when many of these encounters were first reported. Another strand of thought connects the men in black to the interdimensional hypothesis. According to this view, UFOs themselves may not be physical spacecraft at all, but manifestations of realities adjacent to our own, realities that overlap with ours at rare moments. If UFOs are such intrusions, then perhaps the men in black are guardians of the boundary, beings tasked with keeping the human population from peering too deeply into forbidden territory. Their odd, dreamlike qualities could be explained by the idea that they do not fully belong here, and that their attempts to mimic human form and behavior are flawed approximations rather than disguises. Some encounters reinforce this possibility. Witnesses have described MIB who appear suddenly in locked rooms, or who vanish as quickly as they arrive, leaving no trace of departure. There are accounts of vehicles that dissolve into mist, or accelerate away at impossible speeds. There are even reports of MIB who seem confused by ordinary human objects, such as pens, cutlery, or telephones, as though they are struggling to comprehend the simplest aspects of human culture. Such anomalies suggest not merely unfamiliarity, but a fundamental displacement, beings who come from somewhere else entirely. Parapsychologists have also noted the psychic dimension of MIB encounters. Witnesses often describe an overwhelming sense of dread or paralysis in the presence of these figures, a fear so profound that it feels imposed rather than natural. In some cases, witnesses report that the MIB seem to communicate telepathically, planting thoughts directly into the mind rather than speaking aloud. These qualities place the men in black alongside other folkloric entities, shadow people, fairies, demons, who likewise blur the line between physical reality and psychic intrusion. Could the MIB be part of a much older tradition of entities that manipulate human perception, appearing in forms that suit the fears and expectations of the age? The folklorist Jacques Vallée, famous for his research into UFO phenomena, argued that the MIB might represent a control system, a phenomenon that shapes human belief and behavior over time. From this perspective, the men in black are not random intruders, but actors in a larger drama, subtly guiding human understanding of the unknown. Just as ancient people spoke of gods or spirits who enforced taboos, modern witnesses encounter MIB who discourage exploration of the UFO mystery. In both cases, the effect is the same: boundaries are maintained, curiosity is curtailed, and the great unknown remains hidden. Even stranger are the connections some researchers make between the men in black and the realm of occult or paranormal tradition. Their appearance, black suits, unnatural stillness, and ominous presence, bears resemblance to archetypes found in cultures worldwide. In some Eastern traditions, beings dressed in black are psychopomps, entities who guide souls between worlds. In Western lore, the Dark Man appears in witchcraft trials and demonological accounts, often as a figure who bargains for silence. Whether by coincidence or design, the men in black seem to echo these older archetypes, suggesting that they are not new at all, but simply a modern mask for something ancient. Skeptics counter that these qualities may simply be the product of psychological projection. Under stress, the human mind often fills gaps with archetypal imagery, dark suits, hidden faces, threatening presences. The subconscious may borrow from cultural symbols of authority and menace to construct figures that embody fear. But even if this is true, it raises another question. Why would so many people across decades and continents imagine the same archetype? Why would so many minds independently create visitors in black suits, with pale faces and strange voices? For those lying awake at night, the effect of these questions is unsettling yet strangely calming. There is comfort in recognizing that humanity is not alone in its mysteries, that others have felt the same dread and awe, and that the universe may contain layers of reality far beyond our comprehension. Whether the men in black are agents, aliens, interdimensional guardians, or echoes of ancient archetypes, they remind us that the boundary between waking life and dream, between ordinary and extraordinary, is thinner than we often imagine. And so, as we drift deeper into this mystery, we find ourselves standing at a crossroads. On one side lies the rational world of human agencies and earthly secrecy. On the other lies the strange and timeless realm of the paranormal, where the men in black are not simply agents, but symbols of the unknown itself. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps the MIB walk in two worlds at once, part human, part something else, forever straddling the line between the explainable and the inexplicable. When stories of the men in black first circulated in the 1950s and 1960s, they were whispered through UFO magazines, spoken of in hushed tones at conferences, and traded in the letters of researchers who struggled to piece together what was happening. Over time, however, these strange figures escaped the margins of subculture and slipped into the mainstream imagination. Today, the men in black are not only a mystery studied by ufologists, they are cultural icons, appearing in films, television shows, comic books, and literature. Yet, the journey from fearful witness reports to Hollywood blockbusters is one of the most fascinating transformations in the history of the paranormal. The cultural migration of the MIB began with early UFO writers like Gray Barker and John Keel, who chronicled unsettling encounters in books that reached wider audiences than small newsletters ever could. Barker's 1956 book, They Knew Too Much About Flying Saucers, helped cement the idea of shadowy agents who silenced witnesses. John Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecies, further developed the image of the men in black as eerie, otherworldly figures who appeared not just after UFO sightings, but also during broader waves of paranormal phenomena. For readers in the mid-20th century, an age of Cold War paranoia, distrust of authority, and fascination with space, the MIB symbolized both secrecy and the uncanny. In the decades that followed, the men in black seeped into popular media. By the 1970s and 1980s, television shows and documentaries about UFOs frequently referenced them, presenting them as an unsettling puzzle. They were portrayed alternately as government operatives, alien hybrids, or ominous enforcers from the unknown. The very ambiguity of their identity made them versatile symbols. To some, they embodied authoritarian control. To others, they represented the universe's strangeness, pressing in on ordinary lives. The 1990s brought the men in black into the global spotlight. The 1997 film Men in Black, starring Will Smith and Tommy Lee Jones, transformed them into household names. The movie presented the MIB not as sinister figures, but as heroic, wisecracking agents who protected Earth from extraterrestrial threats. while erasing the memories of civilians who stumbled onto secrets. It was light-hearted, comedic, and adventurous, a far cry from the chilling testimonies of people like Dr. Herbert Hopkins. And yet, this shift revealed something important. The Men in Black had become so culturally embedded that they could be reimagined to fit the desires of audiences. For some, the Hollywood portrayal was a kind of cultural sanitization. By turning the MIB into action comedy protagonists, the darker, more unsettling reports of real witnesses were softened. Fear gave way to entertainment, making the subject easier for the public to digest. But this also had the effect of blurring lines further between folklore and fiction. Many younger audiences, who first encountered the Men in Black through the movies, had no idea that the legend was rooted in genuine claims of intimidation and bizarre encounters. To them, the MIB were simply characters, no more mysterious than superheroes or secret agents. Still, the cultural presence of the MIB did not erase their darker roots. Instead, it created layers of meaning. Researchers note that the Hollywood effect allowed governments and skeptics to dismiss claims more easily. After all, if the MIB were now movie stars, how could anyone take witness accounts seriously? This blending of entertainment and folklore may itself act as a form of disinformation, intentional or not. By laughing at the Men in Black on screen, society loses sight of the unsettling nature of the reports off-screen. Beyond cinema, the MIB have left their mark on literature, music, and television. In shows like The X-Files, they appear as mysterious agents of secrecy, enforcing silence around UFOs and paranormal events. Musicians have referenced them as symbols of paranoia and control, while authors weave them into fiction that straddles the line between fact and fantasy. The black-suited figure has become an archetype, instantly recognizable even without context. A stranger in dark glasses, approaching quietly, is now enough to trigger the association. The symbolic power of the MIB lies in their adaptability. In one cultural moment, they represent government surveillance. In another, they stand for alien interference. In yet another, they become comic relief. Their black suits and blank stares are like empty canvases onto which society projects its current fears. During the Cold War, they embodied suspicion of government secrecy. In the digital age, they resonate with anxieties about surveillance, data collection, and the erosion of privacy. In each era, the Men in Black reflect back the unease of the times. Folklorists point out that this is how myths endure. They shift and transform, but they never disappear. Just as older generations spoke of fairies, demons, or trickster spirits, who guarded secrets and punished the curious, modern culture now speaks of the Men in Black. The costumes have changed, but the role remains the same. They are guardians of the boundary between the known and the unknown, the ordinary and the extraordinary. And so, when we see them on the screen, smiling, cracking jokes, saving the day, we are also seeing the shadow of something much older and more serious. Behind the laughter is the quiet echo of real witnesses who opened their doors to pale-faced strangers, who watched coins vanish before their eyes, who felt the chill of unnatural silence pressing into their homes. The cultural Men in Black and the folkloric Men in Black are not the same, but they are linked, bound together in a shared archetype that continues to evolve. As you let your mind drift into this reflection, imagine how these figures have lived multiple lives. In one life, they are eerie visitors who terrify witnesses. In another, they are comic heroes patrolling the galaxy. In yet another, they are symbols of authoritarian control in an uncertain age. All of these versions coexist in the cultural landscape, woven into our collective imagination. And perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all, that something so ephemeral, so difficult to prove, can leave such a permanent mark on human storytelling. As the decades have rolled forward, one might expect the legend of the Men in Black to fade quietly into the past, a relic of Cold War paranoia and UFO mania. Yet the opposite has occurred, even in our digital age, where smartphones capture every passing shadow and government archives slowly open. Reports of strange visitors in dark suits continue to surface. They are rarer now than they once seemed, but they have not vanished. Instead, they linger at the edge of modern life, still arriving when UFOs are seen, still unsettling those who encounter them, and still eluding any final explanation. Researchers of the 21st century approach the subject differently than their mid-20th century counterparts. Today's investigations benefit from instant communication, online databases, and communities of witnesses who can compare notes in real time. If a mysterious man knocks on someone's door in rural Canada, the story can spread across the globe within hours. This has allowed researchers to trace patterns more effectively, comparing details across decades. They note that even as technology changes, the core features of MIB encounters remain stubbornly consistent: the dark suits, the pale or waxy skin, the oddly mechanical behavior, and the chilling command to stay silent. One well-known modern case emerged in 2008, when security camera footage from a hotel in Niagara Falls appeared to capture two identical men in black suits entering the lobby. Witnesses described them as unusually tall, with expressionless faces and synchronized movements. The footage spread online, reigniting interest in the MIB and sparking debates about whether these visitors were genuine, staged, or simply misinterpreted. Regardless of the answer, the video highlighted a striking fact: the archetype of the men in black was alive and recognizable enough in the 21st century to be identified instantly by millions of viewers. Paranormal investigators today also explore the psychological dimension of MIB encounters with greater care. Many note the strong similarities between these experiences and episodes of sleep paralysis or hypnagogic hallucination. In such states, the mind generates vivid images of intruders, often shadowy and menacing, who seem to exert unnatural control over the experiencer. Could the men in black be an externalized projection of internal fears, triggered by the stress of a UFO sighting? Or could they represent something stranger, an experience that manifests both psychologically and physically, blurring the line between the inner and outer worlds? At the same time, modern UFO research has shifted in tone. Since the 2017 revelations of the Pentagon's AATAT program, an official effort to study unidentified aerial phenomena, mainstream news outlets have reported on UFOs with unprecedented seriousness. Pilots, military officers, and even government officials have testified about unexplained aerial craft, and yet, in these discussions, the men in black remain curiously absent. They are not mentioned in congressional hearings, nor do they appear in official reports. It is as though they exist in a separate category, belonging less to the realm of government transparency and more to the shadowy folklore that resists documentation. Still, witnesses continue to share their stories. Some describe visits after uploading UFO videos online, noting that they received strange phone calls or encountered silent figures near their homes. Others recount experiences in which MIB-like visitors warned them not to pursue certain lines of research. The digital age has not erased the mystery, it has simply changed the way it spreads. Instead of whispered rumors and newsletters, we now see YouTube clips, Reddit threads, and podcast interviews, each one weaving the old stories into the modern web of conspiracy and intrigue. Investigators today also point out how the MIB legend interacts with contemporary anxieties. In a world of mass surveillance, facial recognition, and data tracking, the idea of shadowy agents arriving unannounced feels all too plausible. The black-suited figure has become not only a paranormal archetype, but also a symbol of modern authoritarianism. Whether real or imagined, MIB sightings speak directly to fears of being watched, silenced, and controlled in an age where privacy feels increasingly fragile. There are even those who connect the men in black to new frontiers of science. Some theorists suggest that if advanced civilizations, or interdimensional intelligences, are monitoring humanity, they might employ emissaries who appear only briefly, discouraging curiosity, while revealing as little as possible. Others propose that the MIB are not external beings at all but thought forms, psychic constructs created collectively by the minds of witnesses who believe in them. This aligns with the idea of the tulpa, a Tibetan concept in which intense focus and belief can bring an entity into temporary existence. If true, then every story of the MIB contributes to their persistence in reality, each account giving them strength to appear again. Despite these speculations, no definitive proof has ever surfaced. No fingerprints, no unambiguous photographs, no official documents. The men in black remain elusive, always present in testimony, but absent from evidence. And perhaps that is their most enduring quality. They exist precisely in the gap between experience and record, where mystery thrives. If they left behind hard evidence, they would be understood. Instead, they leave behind fear, memory, and silence, intangibles that cannot be measured or filed away. As you let your thoughts wander over this, imagine the quiet persistence of these stories. A witness in the 1950s hears a knock on the door and feels dread at the sight of two strangers. Another witness in the 1980s watches a black car vanish into the night, and another in the 2000s sees pale-faced men walking across a hotel lobby. Each account stands alone, yet together they form a pattern, the same figures, the same warnings, the same lingering unease. Decades apart, continents apart, cultures apart, and yet the shadow remains the same. The men in black, whether human, alien, interdimensional, or psychological, continue to defy resolution. They are as present in the modern world as they were in the early days of UFO research, though their appearances are fewer and stranger, as if adapting to the times. Their silence endures, and in that silence lies a riddle that no investigation has yet solved. When we step back from the lore, the documents, and the folklore, one thing remains constant. The men in black are experienced by human beings. Behind every account is a witness whose memory, fear, and perception gave shape to the story. For this reason, some researchers argue that the real key to understanding the MIB lies not in government files or alien hypotheses, but in the human mind itself. The psychology of the encounter, why it feels so vivid, why it imprints so deeply, and why it spreads so persistently, may be as important as any external explanation. Witnesses often describe a profound, almost primal fear in the presence of the men in black. This is not ordinary nervousness at an unexpected visitor. It is a fear that grips the body, freezes thought, and lingers long after the encounter ends. Psychologists suggest that this intense dread may stem from the uncanny valley effect. When something looks human but feels off, the mind reacts with unease. A waxy complexion, a stiff smile, or an oddly phrased sentence can trigger deep discomfort. The MIB seem to live in this valley, human enough to resemble us, yet strange enough to awaken a sense of danger we cannot fully explain. Memory plays a powerful role as well. Studies of eyewitness testimony show that memory is not a perfect recording, but a reconstruction, shaped by suggestion, expectation, and emotion. In high-stress situations, memories may blur details, filling in gaps with archetypal imagery, dark suits, blank faces, unmarked cars. If a witness has already been exposed to UFO lore, these cultural templates may shape how the experience is remembered. And yet, this explanation alone does not dissolve the mystery. Many witnesses insist that their encounters contain details they had never heard before, elements too vivid or bizarre to be dismissed as cultural contamination. There is also the phenomenon of sleep-related experiences. Many MIB encounters share traits with hypnagogic or hypnopompic hallucinations, events that occur at the edge of sleep. In these states, the mind creates hyper-real visions of intruders, shadowy figures, or oppressive presences. The paralysis, some witnesses report, the sense of a figure standing at the bedside, or the sudden vanishing of the visitor, all align with this well-documented sleep phenomenon. But the overlap is not perfect. Not all witnesses are asleep or near sleep when they experience the MIB. Some are wide awake, going about ordinary tasks when the knock at the door arrives. Another angle comes from the study of mass psychology and folklore transmission. The MIB legend thrives in communities where UFO sightings are frequent and discussed. Each new report adds to the shared narrative, reinforcing expectation. When a witness later sees an unusual stranger, the pre-existing archetype of the MIB can quickly fill in the blanks. Yet, paradoxically, the archetype itself may have originated from only a handful of early reports. In this way, culture and psychology feed one another in a loop, sustaining the phenomenon for generations. But even as psychologists and folklorists attempt to explain the MIB, they often acknowledge the emotional authenticity of witnesses. These are not people telling stories for amusement. Many are visibly shaken, sometimes reluctant to share their accounts at all. The fear is real, whether or not the beings are, and that fear itself becomes part of the phenomenon. As the psychiatrist Carl Jung observed when studying UFOs, it may not matter whether the phenomena are real in a material sense. What matters is that they are real to the psyche, shaping behavior, belief, and culture. For some, the MIB represent a projection of authority and secrecy. In a world where individuals feel small against the machinery of governments, corporations, and surveillance, the archetype of a faceless agent who silences the curious is deeply resonant. The MIB may embody the sense of being watched, powerless, and vulnerable. An experience that transcends UFO sightings and touches on broader human anxieties. In this view, the MIB are less about aliens and more about the timeless fear of hidden powers operating beyond our control. Others, however, see the psychology as pointing towards something beyond psychology itself. They argue that the recurring archetype of the black-suited visitor, appearing across decades and continents, suggests not a coincidence of imagination, but a shared encounter with the unknown. Just as different cultures independently describe shadow people, fairies, or trickster spirits, the men in black may be another mask of the same phenomenon, an intelligence that interacts with humanity through archetypes our minds can comprehend. If this is true, then psychology is not the end of the mystery, but the medium through which it reveals itself. As you reflect on this, consider the dual nature of the human mind, rational and imaginative, scientific and mythic. In one moment, it seeks to categorize experiences, to find explanations in brain chemistry or cultural influence. In the next, it acknowledges the possibility that some experiences are genuine encounters with forces outside our understanding. The men in black live at this threshold, half inside the psyche and half outside, refusing to let us decide which side they truly belong to. And so, the psychological study of the MIB does not diminish their mystery, it deepens it. For even if these encounters are born from the mind, they reveal the extraordinary power of consciousness to shape reality, to create experiences that feel as real as any physical intrusion. And if the encounters are external, then the mind is still the stage upon which they play out, the lens through which the strange intrudes upon the ordinary. Either way, the human dimension is unavoidable. As you let these thoughts settle, imagine yourself as one of those witnesses, sitting alone after an encounter. The knock has faded, the strangers have gone, and yet the mind replays the details endlessly. The pale faces, the empty smiles, the strange words, were they real, or were they shadows of the psyche? The memory does not answer. It only lingers, alive in the imagination, whispering in the quiet hours of the night. As we come to the end of this long journey into the shadows, we are left not with answers, but with a deeper sense of wonder. The men in black remain one of the most enduring mysteries of modern folklore, hovering at the edge of belief and doubt, reality and imagination. They are not as easily categorized as UFOs in the sky or lights on radar. They do not leave behind clear photographs or physical evidence that can be studied in a lab. Instead, they appear in human lives like fleeting ghosts, half real and half symbolic, their very ambiguity ensuring their survival in the collective imagination. When we look back at the many threads we have followed, we see a pattern woven from diverse strands. History gives us early accounts of mysterious strangers, silencing witnesses. Folklore contributes its archetypes of shadowy visitors and trickster beings. Government secrecy feeds the suspicion that someone, somewhere knows more than they are saying. And psychology offers insight into how the human mind perceives, interprets, and even generates experiences that blur the line between inner and outer reality. Together, these threads form the fabric of the MIB mystery, a fabric that is both fragile and strangely resilient. What makes the Men in Black so haunting is their refusal to be pinned down. Each explanation, government agents, alien emissaries, psychic projections, cultural archetypes, feels partly true and partly incomplete. The moment we settle on one interpretation, another arises to challenge it. This shifting nature may be the essence of the phenomenon. Like a dream that changes shape the more we chase it, the MIB seem designed to resist closure, to keep us suspended in uncertainty, and perhaps that is their purpose. In a world that often demands clear answers, the MIB remind us that some mysteries cannot be solved with a single equation or document. They invite us to dwell in the unknown, to accept ambiguity as part of the human experience. Just as the night sky inspires awe not because we understand every star, but because so much remains beyond our grasp, so too do the Men in Black capture our imagination precisely because they cannot be fully explained. There is also something undeniably dreamlike about the way the MIB appear and vanish. They arrive in silence, interact in strange, unsettling ways, and then dissolve back into obscurity, leaving behind only memory and unease. Their world seems to intersect with ours only briefly, as though we catch a glimpse of a greater reality just before it fades. For those who encounter them, the experience becomes a story that cannot be forgotten, whether or not it can be proven. For the rest of us, the stories serve as gentle reminders that reality may be stranger than we assume. As you lie here listening, consider what it means to live with mystery. Most of us seek certainty, comfort, and solid ground. Yet there is also peace in accepting that some questions may never be fully answered. To know everything would be to strip life of its wonder. The unknown, whether it comes in the form of distant galaxies, deep oceans, or Men in Black suits at the door, gives life its depth and texture. It leaves room for curiosity, for imagination, and for the possibility that reality is far more layered than it appears. Some say the MIB are guardians of secrets, ensuring that humanity does not uncover truths it is not ready for. Others believe they are merely illusions of the mind, symbolic figures that reveal more about ourselves than about the cosmos. And still others suspect that they are both real entities that also mirror our deepest fears and fascinations. Whatever they are, they endure. Their legend travels from generation to generation, whispered in late-night conversations, retold in books and films, encountered again in the lonely silence of those who claim to have seen them firsthand. As this story draws to a close, allow yourself to drift into that same twilight space where the Men in Black dwell, between waking and dreaming, between known and unknown. Imagine the quiet streets at night, the soft hum of a distant car, the sound of footsteps just outside the door. The figure is there, and not there, familiar yet strange, reassuring yet unsettling. You do not need to decide if it is real, you only need to feel the weight of the mystery, like a gentle fog that wraps around you and carries you deeper into stillness. The world is filled with mysteries, some vast and cosmic, others quiet and personal. The Men in Black are one such mystery, and whether you see them as myth, metaphor, or reality, they remind us that life is more than facts and evidence. It is also about stories, symbols, and the endless search for meaning. And as you rest now, you carry this story with you, not as something to fear, but as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of imagination, wonder persists. So let go of the questions for now. Let the mystery remain unresolved. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and allow the calm of night to settle over you. The Men in Black will continue to walk the boundary between reality and dream, but you are safe here, drifting slowly into sleep, where mysteries are not meant to be solved, only experienced.